The latest greatest fad in hobby painting seems to be the introduction of acrylic paint markers that every hobby company is racing to produce at the moment. I have largely ignored this fad because of what I believe to be the inherent limitations of painting with this type of marker. These perceived limitations, coupled with the fact that AK Interactive paint markers are pretty pricey here in the US, has had me steering clear of this line of paint products. A set of 6 AK Interactive paint markers costs around $36, and a pack of 34 markers goes for about $124. So you pay anywhere from $3 to $6 per marker. No thank you. I was curious, but not that curious. Then I stumbled upon this 18 marker paint set for $5.99. Now this is a price I can stomach to try out some fad product that is gonna disappear in a few months. To be honest, I have no expectations that these budget markers are going to perform as well as the overpriced name brand version. In fact, at this price, I'll be surprised if they perform at all. So let's put these markers through their paces and see what we come up with. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. My goal with this review is to test the limitations of acrylic paint markers in general. I'm not going to try to tell you that a 33-cent marker works just as well as a $6 marker or anything of that nature. I'm using this cheap set of markers as a trial run of sorts, to see if this type of product is a fit for my painting style. If it is, then I can invest in a more premium product. There are so many areas where I just can't see acrylic markers performing well. First, there is no way that they can be as precise as a set of brushes. Most markers have a single-sized brush tip, and some have a smaller pen-type tip on the opposite end of the marker. This seems pretty limiting when painting details, or trying to get into hard-to-reach parts of the model. Second is the fact that your color choices are limited to the exact color that the marker puts out. I don't see a way of mixing your own colors using these things. So if you enjoy layer painting, the jumps in hue may be too dramatic to get anything resembling smooth transitions. I think you may be able to achieve some degree of smooth color transitions through feathering with these, and that's something that I'm definitely going to put to the test. Also, brush care seems to be non-existent. Can I recondition the tip of the marker? And what if I'm batch painting with these for an extended period? Will these dry out or clog? The first thing that I'm going to do is simply paint over white and paint over black. I do think that it's pretty cool that these come with little stickers where you can paint a swatch of each color so that you can choose a color based on how the paint performs rather than the color of the cap. This paint set doesn't have the color names on each marker, but numbers for reference. So I'll paint each sticker with the matching numbered marker, and we'll go from there. Of course, these paints look great over white, but I also have a large diameter miniature base that is prime black to test these on, and I have to admit that this is completely shocking. I didn't really feel that these markers were anything special when I was painting the white paper, but the coverage over black primer is phenomenal. I'll quickly run through all of the colors in the same way. These things so far have ridiculously good coverage. Honestly, opacity wasn't an area where I thought that the brand name paint markers would fail, but I figured that painting with these really cheap markers would be like painting with cheap craft paints. Super frustrating and a waste of time. So far, I'm very impressed. And not just with the paint coverage. The paint flows out of the marker so smoothly and easily, but it's not pulling up anywhere. The markers are laying down a very even layer of paint, and I'm not doing anything special with my technique as I do this. I'm kind of just rushing through this part of the test. And while I am impressed so far, I know that this isn't real painting. This isn't how I would use this product. For that, we need to paint some actual miniatures. Before moving on, I took a few seconds to add these paint swatch stickers to the back of the storage box. It's important to store acrylic paint markers horizontally and not vertically. So this is the box that I'll keep them in, and I'll store it flat. It's not the prettiest storage solution, but it's sufficiently functional. To test how these markers function on real-life miniatures, I'm choosing 2 different miniatures for very specific reasons. The first miniature that I'll paint is highly textured with many recessed areas that are hard to reach. I also want to see how the jagged, pointy bits on this miniature will affect the tip of the paint marker. The second miniature that I'm painting has a much more open floor plan with lots of large, smooth surfaces to cover. Both of these miniatures have a sort of zenithal highlighting to them as prepared by Awaken Realms. It'll be interesting to see how the darker shadow areas affect the hue of the paint compared to the bright white areas. The speed and flow of these markers is incredibly impressive. No matter how fast I swipe the tip across the mini, I get complete coverage. There seems to be just one level of layer thickness that comes from these markers no matter what the application speed is. The paint doesn't pull up or leave brush strokes when moving slow, nor does it skip areas when moving fast. The opacity of the paint also doesn't appear to be affected by the darker shadow areas within the zenithal highlight. This is a downside in my mind, as it completely defeats the purpose of beginning with a zenithal highlight. It can also be viewed as a positive if you're looking for complete opacity in a single coat. Right out of the gate, I'm noticing that this marker is hanging up on the texture and sharp bits adorning the miniature. There just isn't as much give to the tip of this marker as there is with a standard paintbrush. I feel every bump and divot in the sculpt as I move the paint pen over the surface of the model. I have to be very deliberate about getting paint into any recesses that need painting. This first layer of paint is where any hard to reach places will be most noticeable because I'm trying to cover the entirety of the miniature with this color. The tips of these markers are fairly long and narrow, so reaching most recessed areas isn't a big deal. However, if you need to reach past obstructions to paint more remote parts of the model, the width of the pen itself can pose a serious issue. The body of these paint markers are significantly thicker than any standard brush handle, unless you're painting a house. Trying to highlight with these markers is where they start to show a chink in the armor. I'm approaching this with a very light touch, just grazing the surface of the miniature that I'm highlighting. This creates immediate opaque coverage. I even try barely touching the surface with the tip of the marker, and it's pretty much the same thing. Also, with this paint set, there are only two purple hues to use together. This creates a very stark transition between the two colors, making it appear more like this creature has polka dots rather than highlighted flesh. These two colors would be perfect for this paint scheme if they were in bottle form. This would allow me to mix a 50-50 blend of the two colors to work as a transition color between the base layer and the extreme highlights. I would also be able to properly thin the paint to achieve a little more translucency for a more natural look. Again, this can be viewed as a strength or a weakness depending on how you intend to use these paints. If you want to paint stripes or individual attributes on a miniature, even some fine details, these paint markers work pretty darn well for that. Next, I add the accent color to the piece, which paints over the dark purple perfectly. I'm painting this test mini as closely as possible to my original drone paint up, working within the confines of this limited color selection. This works great for standalone components like the organic gauntlets. For areas where I want this color to blend with the existing purple, it doesn't work quite as well. I'd like to glaze a transition between these two colors, but this isn't possible with these markers. I'll see if I can get a decent transition through feathering as part of this little experiment, but again, I don't think that this is what these markers are intended for. As I continue to add colors to this miniature, I'd like to reiterate that this is not how I'd paint an entire miniature with these markers. I'm doing this as a test to demonstrate the strengths and weaknesses of acrylic markers as a product. I want to see what limitations paint markers impose on the painter if this were the only product in a miniature painter's arsenal. I think that a lot of beginning painters are going to see this product and be enticed by its simplicity and may not be aware of the huge performance gap between using these and using a traditional paintbrush. I'll do another video in the near future where I demonstrate how I would use these paint markers effectively and properly for speed painting. Hey, so this is a good time to remind you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that next video. I do think that these markers are geared perfectly for speed painting, especially if your preferred painting method is a base shade highlight approach to speed painting. These work fantastic for laying down a base layer of paint. And when I'm all done, it looks like a unicorn shat on my miniature. I will say that if you like to paint the rim of your miniature bases black, these are a must-have item. Never has painting a base rim gone so fast or perfect. Even though it's not something that can be achieved with these markers alone, I decided to throw a violet wash over the miniature to see if it helps with the abrupt color transitions that I created with the markers. It absolutely does help, but even a wash can't hide the shortcomings of acrylic markers when used in this way. Alright, moving on to painting our Space Kitty, these markers perform flawlessly. It's very clear that these markers are designed for large, smooth surfaces. In fact, I'd venture a guess that this type of marker was originally created for painting on paper or canvas, and then the idea was pilfered by miniature painting companies looking to make a buck. Regardless of the original intended use, it's clear that these markers can be used to great effect when painting a miniature. The simple fact that I'm never having to clean the brush or reload it with paints makes this type of product perfect for batch painting. That being said, it's a good idea to remove your usual paint cleaning water from the painting area when using these. I don't know about you, but I'm a creature of habit. After going into autopilot and dipping the marker into my cleaning water a couple of times, I learned my lesson. I promptly relocated the jar of water out of arm's reach. I'm basically following the same approach with this paint up as I did with the alien miniature. I'm sketching in highlights with large jumps in color value. It's much easier on the Space Kitty since these markers excel on large smooth surfaces. On the other hand, painting the large textured base of this miniature is a complete chore. The firm tip of the marker just doesn't have the same degree of flex as the bristles of a paintbrush. To test the durability of these paints, I apply a violet oil wash to the miniature and let it dry for 2 hours before attempting to remove it with a dry makeup application sponge. The paints hold up exceptionally well during the removal process. These paints have a near gloss finish to them. I think that this helps prevent the oil wash from excessively adhering to the paint. This helps minimize the amount of staining caused by the oil paint, and it aids with removing the wash. One more thing that I would like to point out is how much abuse the tips of these markers take when painting textured surfaces. The purple and black markers are pretty tore up after painting the entire alien body and the base of the cat respectively. By contrast, the marker that I used to paint most of the cat's suit is still in excellent shape. This is something to consider when deciding how to use these markers. And now I'll do 2 more quick tests for posterity's sake. First, I'd like to see if I can use the white marker to prepare a miniature for slap chop. I move quick with a light touch and just try to graze the raised surfaces. I consider this test a failure. The paint flow is just too high and the paint flows into the recesses more than I would like it to for slap chop preparation. The final test is one that I mentioned earlier, where I want to see if I can achieve smoother blends through feathering. This actually works pretty well, if you move fast enough. It may help to have some airbrush flow improver nearby to dip the tip of the marker. This may thin the paint and also increase the working time of the paint. When I give batch painting a try with these, I'm definitely going to have some flow improver nearby. I fear that the tips of these markers may dry out if exposed to air for an extended period of time, but that's for another video. These paint markers in no way replace a more traditional painting setup. Standard acrylic paints and paintbrushes are infinitely more versatile than paint markers. However, I do feel that these markers have a place in my collection for applying a base layer of color to a miniature. I'll probably only use these for a base shade highlight approach to speed painting. I also probably won't replace these once I've used them up. Well, maybe I'll keep black around for painting base rooms. I'd like to thank my channel members for supporting all that I do here on this channel. You too can become a channel member for as little as $1.99 per month and receive perks such as early access to videos, extended versions of all of our painting tutorials, and even a tier that allows you to choose which miniature I paint next. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community that's looking for the latest, greatest gadgets in miniature painting.